I suffered a serious bleed at the bottom of the aorta and almost bled to death. So I know how lucky I am to be here. I spent nearly 3 weeks, I believe, in ICU, and then couple of weeks, I think it was, on Wolf Ward and then Stonehouse. But yeah, I'm very, very lucky to still be here.
Okay.
The best way I can describe what I experienced is that I was in another world, totally different to anything I've ever seen before. In fact, I've never seen anything like what I experienced. In the delirium, I had several deliriums. None of them were, I could say, would be nice. Probably the most horrific was when I was drowning. And since talking to you and nurses afterwards, I think the experience that I went through when I was drowning, I can relate to when I was in ICU and the doctors and nurses were trying to wean me off the ventilator. What my experience was then, that I was in a big plastic tunnel. Best way to describe it is to say that if you think of a Hoover and you've got the long flexible tube, but a see-through flexible tube which is massive, full of water, loads and loads of tubes and flexible pipes going down the side of it, and I'm in it and I'm drowning, and I'm pulled out by two females. One of the females is upside down looking down at me. The voices I'm hearing are very calm and soothing and telling me not to panic, obviously. But I was choking. It was really as if I was in the water and experiencing a drowning experience. There was a male voice and two females, and they pulled me out of the water. Talking now afterwards, I think that was probably when everyone was trying to wean me off the ventilator, because my wife walked in on one of the sessions, and when we talked about it afterwards, she said, she was the first one who said it and said, I think that's when you were being weaned off the ventilator. But it was an absolutely horrifying experience. I was kidnapped by a male nurse. I was in a war. I was in a World War I German airplane, the airplanes with 3 wings. Don't know what, I was just in it, and I could fly around the sky in a battle and goodness knows what. I was in a Second World War experience where this was a really strange one, because I was in a hotel in one of the Arab countries, I'm not sure which, but it was where they treated the poor people very poorly. And I can visualise not a painting, a rectangle picture on the wall which is carved out of sort of stone. And when I look at this picture, which is a war scene, it gradually comes alive, and the next thing is I'm there and there's a battle going on around me, and I believe it was the Germans, and I think something like Tunisians or something like that, Turks, I think it was. And it was horrible with what the Germans were doing to the Turks. Another experience was in the hotel where I can visualise coming out of the hotel, and the hotel staff were kicking the poor people who were begging at the bottom of the steps, and that was really horrible as well. When I was kidnapped, had several sessions of that, being in a ward, kidnapped, being in a house. The same male nurse was there all the time, wouldn't let my wife come in visit me, although I could see her over by the entrance. In all the experiences I had of the hallucinations, I would say I couldn't do anything. I was looking on. I was hopeless. Sorry, I was helpless because I couldn't do anything about it. Trying to think what the other hallucinations were I had.
Were you accused the bank?
Oh yeah, I was. When I came round a bit on the ward, I caused quite a few scenes because the situation where I was in the hotel, I thought I was still paying for the hotel with my card, and I told my wife to cancel it, and she said, "We haven't been on holiday," and of course in my view I'd been there. I could picture it. It was live to me, it was real to me, and my wife was lying to me. And where the male nurse was holding me against my will, I know one of the nurses came over in the ward, and he was called Pete, a nice chap, and then I started on to him, having hospital experience, told him I was going to get the on-call manager, to which his face was a picture at the time, but now I know what I was like and I can put it behind me, but the experience I went through at the time was really awful, and I know I put my wife through hell. We've had lots of talking sessions since I come out of hospital, and I found that's probably the best way forward for me, that we can sit and talk about my experience, what I went through. And now I've learned what Mary Ann went through, because Mary Ann went through a different experience of trauma to what I did, because she came into ICU every day. I was in a coma, and she was there every day. She came down, she went home. She didn't know if I was going to be there the next day, if I was going to survive. At one stage she thought I was brain damaged. So we've both gone through a very different type of trauma, and the hallucinations. I've put my wife through hell really with what I've come out with, because I actually believed what was happening to me, and it was a horrible experience. Only now I can look back and say, you know, I can picture what I went through, but I know it's not real. The intensive care unit that I was in was a 4-bedded ward. I never saw the patient on my left. On the right there was a tall window and a yellow helicopter outside, and the pilot kept coming in because he was transferring patients and equipment from ICU to the ward. And when I eventually got onto Wolf ward, though I didn't know it was Wolf at the time, the yellow helicopter was out on the balcony. This was all real to me, and trying to explain it to my wife at the time, she must have thought I was going around the bed, what had happened to me. The hospital very well, yeah, I've worked for 50 years in switchboard's been my main work. I'm now retired, I only do 1 day a week. But yeah, I know the switchboard in and out. Sorry, I know the hospital mainly in and out. Yeah.
No, I never knew anything about the delirium. I think for me, when you go in and having experience with the hospital. Like Tony, I worked in the hospital for a while and being on the wards, but I've never ever been into ICU. And having like everybody else in life, we've had traumas in the family. Here we go again. I do get upset, I'm sorry. But walking into ICU for the first time and seeing him the way he was, you just go into another world, and I never knew anything. Like when you go in, you're given leaflets to read, and you've got your family with you. You do read the books, but you don't take it in. And then when it wasn't until Tony was in there a couple of days, I happened to say to one of the nurses, God, he's having a lovely sleep. And they said to me, no, Tony's not asleep. He's in a little bit of another world where he's taken in this and he's taken in that. And I could quite understand it a little bit then. But like I've said to Rachel, when you walk into ICU, it's not like walking into another ward where you can say to the patient, oh, hello Fred, how are you today? You just eyes down because everybody's seriously ill. And then you just go to the person that you're going to be with and you just sit there for hours. The nurses are absolutely fantastic. And Tony came around eventually and he was on the ward. There was a time when they were trying to bring him out all the time when he was in ICU. They were trying to bring him around and he just couldn't manage it, so they'd whip him back in. I never knew, or I wasn't told anything about this delirium. So when Tony went on the ward and started talking to me, I honestly thought he was brain damaged because he accused me of so much. He accused me of, we lost his mum, of burying his mum without him. When he was kidnapped, that was horrendous. I had to call the nurse over because he got so annoyed with me and accusing me of, you know I was kidnapped, why didn't you do anything about it? And I'm looking at him thinking, oh my God, what on earth is going on with this man of mine? And I tried to calm him down and I couldn't, and I said, Tony, you haven't been kidnapped. I sent you messages. I had to go all home and get his phone and bring it down to him. I sent you messages on the phone. I said, I'll go home and get the messages. We only live 5 minutes away. I went home, got the phone, brought it back down, and then he accused me of taking the messages off. And that was when I had to call the nurse over because he got so, and I honestly thought he was deranged. I thought he was brain damaged. And since talking to Rachel, I found out about this delirium. I think Rachel showed us a leaflet about delirium. I honestly think that if we were given the delirium pamphlet then, when Tony was in ICU and I'd read this pamphlet, that I could have understood him a little bit more and it would have helped me a lot more. And the other thing was the diary. I think the diary is absolutely essential. The best thing that helped Tony through the days that he missed, and I would have liked to have thought, but I do know now that it's in procedure that people are encouraged to write into this diary, because I never had the opportunity to write in the diary. Not that the nurses didn't ask me, I never asked them. And like I say, I'm a pretty pushy person normally, but under the circumstances, going in there every day and facing what you had to face, I didn't like to ask questions. So I think the diary is a must for every patient and for the family to be able to write in just to say, oh, Tom came in today, or what's happened today, or like Tony said, my grandson used to come in and talk about Argyle, and afterwards I said to Tony, God, you know, he would have drove you around the bed listening to that. But it would have been nice to have been able to write it in the book and just to put little snippets in, really, and to know more about the delirium. I mean, I can't thank the nurses enough. They were absolutely fantastic. And another thing that I thought was absolutely wonderful what the nurses did, every time somebody went to Tony, they never just went to him. They said, Tony, we're just going to do this, we've got this procedure to do. They touched him, and I thought that was lovely, because I thought to talk to him, even though he was unconscious, I do know that somewhere in there somebody could have listened. And he did say to me afterwards that he did hear voices calming him, and it calmed him, because Tony is quite a nervous person, so, and nobody knows him or your partner like your partner does. And the nursing staff, I used to say to them, you know, he's afraid, you know, he will be afraid when he wakes up and finds a tube in his mouth, etc. And they took everything on board. They were absolutely fantastic. Oh, I think it's still affecting us, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
I think I had a couple of occasions when Tony was in bed and he jumped out of bed and thought he was in a war. And I thought, oh my, here we go. And I've got to say, it's the help of Rachel that talking, and we do talk, and Rachel talks, and I honestly do believe that talking has helped Tony immensely, really. And going to when we went to some of the classes with the nurses,
Yeah.
we had, you know, it was nice to be asked to go to these classes, and Tony talked, and the nurses were giving him questions and he was answering them, and I think it's helped you, because with your short-term memory as well, isn't it? Because that's affected you really badly.
The delirium that I experienced continued after I come out of ICU, throughout the entire time I was on the wards, and when I was home. I think it went on for a month, 6 weeks or more, possibly longer than that. The situation was that as soon as I go to bed and I put my head on the pillow, then I was seeing my deliriums. And it lasted for a couple of months or so. I don't get it now, but I do think about it. If someone says to me something about ICU, then despite my going back to ICU, seeing where I was in ICU, where my bed was, if anyone says something to me about ICU, the first thing I see is my 4-bedded bay with the yellow helicopter outside. I know it sounds daft, but to me it was real. I know it's not real, but to me it was, and I can't get rid of that memory that I have of the deliriums. But talking about it is helped. I can't say I suffer from delirium now. When I go to bed, I don't think about it. The sessions were extremely helpful. Talking about it and what we did helped me a lot. I think that and the tablets I was on helped me immensely. And as I say, now I think nothing of delirium. It's only when someone talks to me or asks me something about ICU. But one of the most...
It's helped us to understand it.
Yeah, one of the nurses in the book had said what they're actually doing is torturing my brain. And the most interesting thing to me that has come out of my stay in ICU is that I've suffered all my life from my late teens with headaches and migraines, such that I used to carry Zomig tablets around in my pocket. When I came out of ICU, and since then, which was now 1 year and a week or so ago, I've not suffered one headache or migraine or even the slightest hint of a headache. So whatever drugs they gave me in ICU, something good has come out of it. But if I had the choice, looking back now, would I go through ICU and the hallucinations, delirium, or would I have the headaches? And I'd choose the headaches anytime. can't think I'm having a blank.
No, I think for the experience of going on to the onto the ward, with having your family around, and then the family's got to go obviously because Tony was in there for a long time. What I did notice was that when the doctors came around, and I know they're busy, and I know it's not like another ward, and like there would be like not 2 of them, but like 8 of the doctors would come around. Nobody used to say anything, and you're just in limbo. You know, you're thinking, oh, they're going to tell me something today, and you're never told. You know, you're thinking, oh, can I ask? Am I allowed to ask? The nurses that were sat there were absolutely brilliant. You know, sitting there all day looking at that machine, looking at that one patient. You know, I often wondered, you know, how they cope doing that with, like, did they go out last night? You know, and they had a, you know, and they come in all, they must come in and think, right, I've got this person to look after, and to do that for 8 to 12 hours a day, my God, it's really hard. Really hard.